All right. So for the first question, are you okay with this being recorded and on the record?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Yeah. So what is your first name and last name?
Nick Martin. Nick Martin. He, him, his.
And what is your major and your minor and your school year?
My major is econ. My minor is creative writing, and I'm a transfer student. I'm in my last year. So I think I'm like a fifth year, sixth year. Yeah.
And what did you say your pronouns were again?
He, him.
So for the first question, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So I was born and raised in San Diego. I grew up in Canto in Spring Valley. I went to high school at Patrick Henry. And in high school, well actually in middle school, when I was like 14, I started writing. And I later in high school used it as like a coping mechanism for some things that happened. And as that progressed, I realized I was starting to get a knack for it. I don't think I was that great yet, but I knew I had something there. So I just kept going with it. And yeah, I love it.
And kind of like building more on like that coping, like what got you interested in writing poetry?
So, long story. So like the initial story, there was this girl I liked in 8th grade. And I told her, she liked reading, so I told her I liked writing. And we were cool. She's an amazing person. But then like she would edit like some of the stuff I wrote just for fun. And you know, she was even telling me that I was doing pretty good with it and to keep going. And so high school, 11th grade, I tried out for a talent show, and it went okay. But the next year I did like a spoken word piece, and I won the talent show, and it helped like my confidence in spoken word performance poetry. My writing really, I feel like, took off more after high school, and probably even more so recently. I feel more grounded. I feel like I have more life experience, so it kind of just helps with that. And I think my reference points are gaining. They're larger than they were before. Yeah.
And at that talent show, you said that it was in your middle school or high school?
It was high school. It was my senior year. I started writing in middle school, but the talent shows I competed in, those were in high school. Yeah. So I competed against all different kinds. So there was people who were dancers, singers. I think one person was a gymnast or something of the sort. Or no, it was ballet. It was a lot of cool people. A lot of people that I actually knew and grew up with too. It was a cool time. I think what really got me fired up, I remember being in 11th grade for the talent show, and I got 3rd place. And so whenever you place top 3, you get to perform at the pep rally. And I was like, I'm going to get to perform at the pep rally. And they told me that, like, literally the day of, I didn't... So initially, I thought I would just go to the pep rally, like, the day of, and, like, see where I'm performing at. And then they told me, no, I'm not performing. And I was like, what? But I got top 3. And so then... I literally told my friend Daniel, who also would edit my poems sometimes, I'm like, next year I'm getting 1st place. And that's what I did. I was so heated that day. I was like, I was fired up though. And in senior year, I got it, performed at pep rally. I think that was just more validating for myself. I think I just wanted to feel legit enough on like a social aspect. Because it was different.
And this pep rally happened after your talent show, right?
Yeah, it did. So it'd always be like near the end of the year where all the talent show people would perform their stuff. And I think it was the day I performed was the day Coloring Book came out by Chance the Rapper. So I think that was like in May or June of 2016. I'm showing my age now. But yeah, it was so cool though. I remember that moment. There was actually so I had some friends who did a project based off the poem, and they used some of the film from the pep rally for the video that they created. Like, it was a really cool project. One of the people that was a part of it, she's like a model now. Like, she's like doing big stuff. She did work with Tyler, the Creator. She's flying back and forth between LA and New York. And the others, I think he's a part of his dad's business or possibly working on something on his own. I'm not sure, but they're both really great people. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the pep rally, like, what type of poetry did you perform, and like, what did you feel?
So it was basically about the trauma I faced. So I was talking about, well, the piece was entitled Untitled Puzzle, and I got inspiration from Untitled Unmastered by Kendrick. That came out, I think, that year or the year before. And it's really just about like life not being really absolute or certain. And then talking about, you know, the stuff that happened with my mom and some of the mental health crisis that occurred throughout my life, that happened with her, and trying to overcome it and be positive. So that was what the poem was about, but I tried to make it to where it could still be presented in a comfortable light, to where people would not be drowned by a bunch of trauma dumping, but more so like rhythmic rhyming, flipping the rhymes to make sure it's not A, B, or A the whole time. I think that's actually one of the poems that challenged me, because there was literally lines from there that I held on to for like a year or more just to put in that poem. Like when I write, I'll literally keep stuff that I want to use for later. And I think that's one of the poems where I realized my writing style of like webbing stuff in. So I like have a line, save it for later, write it on the edge of a paper when I get ready to write the whole poem, and then just throw it in where I feel like. I don't know if I do that as much as I used to. I think that was more just me being able to learn how to formulate poems. Now I kind of feel like I kind of just try to go off a feeling, or just kind of try to just go off not thinking. My cousin put me on to not thinking too much, but like just timing myself, like a short minute drill, like a 5-10 minute drill, just writing whatever, and it's made my poetry really good. So yeah. I know that was like a lot for that question, but
no. But kind of like building on like what you said earlier with like your mom. Do you think the themes of like family and mental health are kind of themes that you like to write about?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, yes. I try to do it in a lens that hasn't been heard before, because I know like when people hear mental health, they kind of just we're gotten to a point where it's so ubiquitous, like everyone kind of knows the typical conversation, which isn't a bad thing. But I feel like for me now, I'm trying to frame it in different ways so people can still have it be consumed, but not repetitive or like redundant. Like even in our class we did together, one of the critiques was like using the word anxiety, and I'm like, okay, how can I change that word to match the theme of what I was really trying to address? So yeah, I try to talk about stuff that involves mental health and family. One of the poems I recently wrote was about my aunt who passed, and using the Spider-Man movie, the most recent one, as like a pop culture example to help build life into the poem, and then talking about my aunt, and then talking about grief and how to deal with loss, and how it's not really linear, it's more so all over the place, kind of. So I really like that poem a lot, actually. I can't wait till I get to perform it.
So like kind of like building on those like themes of grief and family, like what does poetry mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. Release. I think that's the first word that came to mind, because like I don't know a person that writes that doesn't find pleasure or like find like a peak of like just getting, like, you know how people just have to purge stuff out sometimes? Like everybody that I've met that writes, like that's kind of what they have to do, because sometimes they can either be passive aggressive, or they may not have people to really vent to, or maybe they just want to be heard or feel seen. I think poetry, it's more than expression. You kind of live your life thinking like that. It's kind of, I've met people who will look at life more poetically, and people will look at them strange, because it's like, why are you thinking of life like that? But it's kind of what keeps people alive. I think the way I look at life is like, I kind of feel like everyone's connected, and I love the feeling of Sonder, and just like I was literally looking at the person at the elevator, like I wonder what their life is like. Kind of like how GTA 5, you bounce into different humans, and I just love that because I don't know, it's just I really feel like we're all connected in some way, even if it's like not necessarily impactful, at least on the surface, but I think poetry kind of ties that in. At least it does for me. Hopefully everyone finds what that is for them. Yeah.
And like building on like those themes of, like you said, like a life and like release, and how poetry does that for you, has writing poetry been like one of the main outlets for that, or maybe the only outlet? In your experience?
Yeah. Absolutely. In high school, it was, because I mean I played sports all my life, but it was always team sports, and I think I was always like introverted, and I mean I still am, but a lot of my thoughts and introspection and ideas came from this solitude. I'm sorry, what was the question again? I feel like I'm going on a tangent.
Oh no. Like going off of the themes of like life and how poetry has been an outlet for release and feeling alive. Has poetry been the only outlet for you, or like one of the main outlets for that?
Yeah, it's honestly yes. Like because of some of the stuff I've gone through, and unfortunately my lack of trust in people sometimes. I have trust issues I'm still trying to work through. I think poetry has been just always there. That and music, like playing music, because I play piano a little bit, and then also just listening to a lot of music, like a lot. Like I'll listen to music the way people read books. Like I really try to analyze stuff. I like prepare. Like I'll set aside time to not do anything but listen to a new album, even if it's not my favorite artist. I'm still interested. Mainly because I just want to learn. I remember I used to like just watch interviews all the time with people. Like I remember when Breakfast Club was really popular. Hot 97 is still pretty popular. And I just wanted to learn what people were like from the creative space. Yeah, I love that. I still do it sometimes, but not as frequently as I did back then.
And like kind of like going off that same line of thought, was there a poet or a writer or a musician that you admire or inspired you to write?
Absolutely. So in terms of poets, there's Khalil Gibran and there's Rudy Francisco. Khalil Gibran is from the 1800s, a Lebanese Christian poet, I think. He wrote the book called The Prophet, and that piece, that work of poetry is amazing. There's a Netflix cartoon of it, so check that out too. The way Khalil Gibran writes, he makes it to where it's really hard for you to argue against it. He literally has this one poem about marriage and like not being too like tied together, but allowing the waters or the airs of life to flow between the two. And I'm like, that's so like real, because like you don't want to suffocate your partner, but at the same time like you still want to have that balance. So there's that. Rudy Francisco is amazing. He's so humble. He's kind of like a trailblazer for San Diego poetry and the spoken word scene. He's been on the Night Show with I think Jimmy Kimmel a couple times. And he's real humble about it. Like I ran into him after a Nas concert, and yeah, he's really chill, very kind. He's very dedicated though. Mm-hmm. He's from stories I've heard, the way he teaches other poets to present and perform is to know the poem not from beginning to end when it comes to memorizing, but being able to start from anywhere and just being able to go right then and there. It's a very difficult thing to do, but that shows why he's one of the best ever in the world. And then for musical influences, in high school, Donald Glover, Childish Gambino was the person I related to the most. I grasped onto his work the most because I remember hearing a lyric talking about like these black kids want something new, I swear. And like it's talking about how like we'd be embarrassed to like not listen to like what's popular. and I was on the album Camp, and I remember hearing Firefly for the first time, and I was like, wow, this is really cool and different. I listened to the whole album, and I was like, wow, that's how I feel right now. And I still resonate with a lot of his work. I mean, the show Atlanta, season 4 is going on right now. I love that show. I have literally almost all his vinyls, like Camp, Because of the Internet, which is like probably my favorite, Awaken My Love, Stone Mountain Kauai. I don't have March 15, 2020 on vinyl, but I mean, if I get it, cool. If not, it's whatever. But yeah, he's just a very special person. I feel like if I were to like meet him, I don't even know if I want to talk. I'd probably just want to be in his presence for a little bit, because I just don't know what I'd say. Yeah.
And like, what is it do you think about these poets, these artists, these musicians? What is it about them that like makes it resonate, like you connecting with them?
I love this question. No filter, no fronts. I think I remember, if we're still talking about Donald, I remember he posted on IG a bunch of like, on these like little sticky notes or note cards or notes from the hotel, talking about stuff that you just don't tell people. And he was talking about like, I'm afraid of like being alone or dying alone. I'm afraid of like, people seeing what I masturbate to. I'm afraid of, all these different things that are like so real. I'm like, he made himself so vulnerable in that moment, to the point where people were like scared for him and like checking on him, which isn't a bad thing. Cause I mean, that can be a sign of like, other stuff, but he was really just trying to be real in that moment. Because he realizes if he's able to do that, then that opens the gate for others like me to just be more real with people. Khalil, I know he was meant to be in the time that he lived, but I really wish I could have just like see what he'd live like in the 21st century. Like, what would he think of like sneaky links? What would he think of like like real talk? Like, what would Khalil Gibran say about this stuff? Because it's like he seemed to have an answer for everything about the stuff that really mattered. And so I think that shows his self-awareness and his care for people. And then Rudy, I think for him, he's able to make stuff come alive when he speaks. The way he talks about the love for his daughter, like, that's so real. The way he talks about one of my favorite poems is about how fish drowned in a lake, and it's how can fish drown, right? It's what they're meant to do. And then he talks about like depression. It's like, how can a human die from like living? Like, it's what we're supposed to do. And I'm just like, bro, this is crazy. So I think it's really the vulnerability that draws me to them, and I think it's the willingness to be judged. Because all of them have probably been scrutinized at more than one point in their life for their work. But I think they stayed true to who they were, and they were honest. And that's like my top value. I want to be honest more than anything. In my writing especially. So.
Yeah, and building off on that connection of like being real and having no filter and that willingness to be judged, what is your favorite thing when it comes to writing poetry?
That's a cool question. These are all really good questions, Ron.
And your answers are authentic too, so thank you.
So it was like, what is how do I want to be real in my poetry, or like how do I?
Yeah. And I guess tying it into like, what is your favorite thing when it comes to doing that?
I think my favorite thing is just finding reference points that everyone relates to. Like, I think I was talking to you about how I used a Spider-Man movie to relate to the grief of my aunt dying, and using that as a way of having my net casted out far to people who've had loved ones that they lost, but also having them feel me in that moment, like, and feel my pain. I forget how it was said, but I had a professor that said, get to the specific to reach the universal. And that's way better than, I think, just speaking very broadly on stuff that's going on. If I start with the universal, or if I start with the specific, I will reach the universal. Like, the way I funnel it, the way I write, the way I funnel the information in a poem, it's not meant for someone to already know what I'm talking about. It's meant for them to want to dig more and then realize, like, oh man, I really feel like I lived out what he was talking about. Or, I don't know, I think people just want to feel, like, I honestly, a lot of the times, like, especially after the pandemic and everything, I think people just want to feel. I don't think people care about everything that's going on all the time. And it's not a fault of anyone. I mean, how can you keep up with everything? But I think at least, wanting to feel something for the world and themselves and people in society, because you kind of just get desensitized after hearing one, global crisis after another, especially our generation, to where we've grown up with the crisis happening every year, really, to be quite honest. Like recessions, 9/11, depression, the recession we're going through right now, pandemic. It's like, it's kind of just nonstop. And I think we've gotten to a point where we want to connect with people still, but of all the crazy stuff going on, we're kind of like, what's the point if it's gonna just end, So yeah, I want people to feel, and I think that's what I get the most gratitude and happiness from when I write. That's the aim. Yeah.
And in your experience, what do you think is the most challenging aspect of writing poetry? I know this is going to be
No, this is good, because I love getting everything right on the first try, and I don't like going back on my poems. Like, if I write it and it doesn't feel right, I'm like, okay, I guess it's just not going to be it. But I'm like, I can't do that, because poems I've gone back to and fixed, some of them have come out really well. I think the biggest challenge is my patience. And that's literally me. It's not even the poem. It's literally, the poetry has nothing to do with the challenge at all, actually. It's really myself. And I think from the spoken word perspective, it's just the memorization. Memorization is, oh man. I feel like, when I was younger, I used to try to, like, do hacks. Like, I'd eat blueberries and chocolate and, like, drink sweet tea and thinking I could, like, make my memory better. So, I mean, it worked out a little bit. Like, sometimes chocolate does help. Blueberries do help with memory, but, like, long term, nothing short term. So, I definitely self-sabotaged on a few occasions. I remember I had a performance, I had a full set memorized, and the last poem I memorized the week before, and then I, like, forgot it. And I had to, like, freestyle for, like, a good minute and a half, and then I just ended the poem like, all right, I'm done. Like, I was like, this is not going well. Hopefully nobody noticed. But yeah, it's not my favorite, but the thing is, memorization is the most rewarding. And actually, going back to my old work and trying to make it better also makes it more rewarding. So I have to be more patient with myself, show more grace to myself. It's just, yeah, I can't practice. Or I have to practice what I preach as well. So that's a part of it.
And building off on what you said on, like, how you make your poetry better, how do you, I guess, evaluate whether your poem is good or if it's bad?
That's a good question. How do I evaluate? Like, my initial response is like, okay, are people feeling it? Like, external validation, right? But I want to move away from that, because if I just judge based off if people like it or not, I'm going to end up writing to please a crowd, and that's not what I want my work to do. And most of the time, the poetry that stands the test of time is stuff that people have problems with. Like, not even just poetry, music, everything, books, the stuff that was contradicting to whatever was popular, or at least question people's thinking or the way they do life. Like, that's the kind of stuff that lasts. I want to have stuff that lasts, because I'm gonna be gone, but my words will be here forever. If I'm able to accomplish that, that'd be great. Like, I'm reading with a group, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right now, and I'm just thinking of, like, legacy, and I'm thinking of being able to be relevant and challenge people years and decades after a book being released. Like, if I'm able to do that with my work, that's how I know it's good. I don't even think I care as much about punchlines as I used to. Like, I do for the spoken word aspect, because you kind of have to keep up with people's attention spans. But I really just want my stuff to last forever as much as it can.
And when it comes to like that, putting your legacy or like making a mark, do you see writing poetry as something you do for yourself or something you do for others?
That's a good question. I like doing it for myself. I just feel like my motive is always the other people. I just really don't want people to feel alone at all. Because, I don't know, but when I write and like people tell me it's good, I'm like, thank you. But sometimes I don't believe it all the time. But I realize, okay, like whatever it was about the poem, it touched them. And in that moment, they needed it. I remember like someone crying to a piece I did that I performed. And I was just thinking, what was it about the piece that made them or caused them to reach that point? And whatever it was, it stuck with them. And so, yeah, that's what I try to do. It's definitely not easy, but that's what I try to do. I just want to be a better writer. However I can relate to people, that's the motive. I used to write a lot more to like cope and stuff for myself, but I'm in a space where I'm trying to write poetry not just for the sake of coping, because if I only use it for coping, then I'm not going to write as much. So that's one of the issues I had a few years back. I like stopped completely, and I was like, oh, I'm better now, I'm good. And then I really wasn't, but writing poetry kind of just kept me grounded, and it kept me creative. It kept my mind going, because I'm always in my world. Like, I'm living in my world all the time. Like, it's crazy how it is, but I'll literally be in my own world most of the day, and then whenever I have to like live in the regular society, live regular life, I have to like step outside of it. But yeah, I just try to bring whatever I can with me when I do that.
So I guess kind of like building off of being in your own world, do you see writing poetry as a way for you to connect with the world that we're in now?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think when that happens, I'm able to give fresh ideas, or at least give fresh insight, or stuff that may have not been thought of. Like, a lot of innovation for me comes from introspection. I don't think I can get a lot of new ideas all the time from constant bombardment of conversation. Like, I will get insight from it, but I need time to reflect. I've noticed, like, for me, like, it takes a lot longer for me to process stuff. Like, I've always been the last person to finish a test in class. I've always been the last person for a lot of things in life. A lot of stuff just happens later for me. And rather than fighting against that, I'm just, leaning into it. And so, yeah, the introspection piece of being in my own world is what allows me to actually make meaningful connections. I don't know. I sometimes think people have the desire for real human connection. It's just, when you get older, it's like, if you don't serve X, Y, Z, then you're no use to me as a human being. That's kind of how we think. And it's sad, but I feel like the current society promotes isolation, not intentionally all the time, but I think a lot of us know that it's easier. It's like the old saying, if you want something done right, do it yourself. And I think a lot of people think that way, not just in terms of work, but relationships, friendships, living, bills, anything. Because I think a lot of times, if you've been disappointed so much in your life, you're kind of just tired of trusting people. So I think that's probably where I'm at too. So I'm trying to like help myself while helping other people with that, if that's possible, because that's a whole lifelong journey, honestly.
And do you consider writing poetry as something as like a personal and intimate activity, or do you also see this as being part of your career in the future?
It's gonna be a part of my life forever. I think I was saying earlier, like poetry, some people like live it out. Like the way I talk to people, the way I go about the day, the way I admire things in like the middle of the day, like, oh dang, I love that flower. Just something simple like that. I love how poetry can add life to the mundane. Because a lot of the stuff that we do, eat, sleep, poop, all that, like, it's mundane. It's the regular stuff we have to do to keep up with our bodies, which isn't a bad thing. I think poetry allows us to romanticize it in a way to where life feels like worth living. And can you repeat the question one more time? I want to answer I had a second answer to that.
Yeah. The second part of the question is, do you see this as being part of your career in the future?
Yeah. So I'm going to be releasing a book soon. And so whenever that happens, it kind of marks the start of my career as an author, officially, for me at least. I've had a couple publications. One with San Diego State in their online articles, and then one with Soft Quarterly, which is a magazine highlighting local artists and other artists in the nation. It's really cool. Like, I love what they're doing. Shout out to them. But yeah, I think using it as a career would be great. I understand it's hard because it's like you got to eat, and if the books are popping one month and they're not the other, you got to figure something out. So whether it's a career or not for me, I'm just satisfied in knowing that I still love and do it regardless of money. But if I can be like a Ruby Power or Color level type poet, that'd be fire. That way I could just eat off the book a little bit for some years, you know. That'd be nice.
And how do you balance your time as a college student and your time as an aspiring poet?
It's hard, man. Oh my goodness. I think what it's the great thing about it is I kind of made it to where I have to write for school as well, which helps me. Like, being a creative writing minor, that helps me to like remind myself, like, oh yeah, I do this, like, and I feel good about it. Like, I'll have moments in class where I feel challenged, but I feel like my poetry has gotten to a point where I'm like satisfied in it for myself. Like, oh, I'd even read this. Like, I could be a fan of this person. Like, you know, stepping outside of myself for a bit. Like, I would be a fan of this guy. Like, this is good stuff. So yeah.
And with your interest in writing poetry, was there anyone or anything important in your life that discouraged you from pursuing poetry?
I mean, there were moments where when I was younger, I was like, I just want to like go outside and like just do poems, just boom, boom, boom. And I understand like the folks I was talking to about it. They didn't discourage me per se, but they were trying to be realistic, which I mean, you know, I'm not mad at them for that. I'm thankful for that. But I think there was a bit of discouragement there. But I think a part of it too is like, you know, the arts and just the creative world is hard to get to a certain baseline. Like, I think 98% of the books written don't sell over 5,000 copies. Like, 98% of books. That's not just poetry, that's like everything. So like, you know, it's kind of, you know, if you're not aware of this, you know, you might have imposter syndrome, because like every time you walk into a Barnes & Noble, it's like New York bestseller, New York bestseller, New York, like everywhere you go. And it's like, dang, like if I'm not in Barnes & Noble, I'm not doing it. But that's not true. It's just, you gotta understand how the market works. Like, it's a game as well. Like, we always talk about the rap game, but books are the same way. You know, other genres of music are the same way in terms of the competitive nature. You don't always get to decide who gets to be who they are. It's kind of controlled by a mixture of things. You got people who, you know, will buy the books, like fans, but then you also got publishers who, you know, determine taste making. You got, you know, all kinds of people, influential people, behind the scenes, front of the scenes. Yeah, it's like music. Yeah.
And with those comments of like being realistic, how did you motivate yourself to continue to write past that?
Oh yeah, I like that. It's just because it just kept me alive, man. Like, I really don't know where I'd be, because I really was in like a dark place. not even like a while back, but like maybe a year ago. And I was like, bro, this is really tough. I was working a lot. I was in school. I was trying to do everything on my own. And then I just took the time to just write about it, and I just felt more connected. And when I shared an excerpt of the poem, people were like, oh my goodness, like, that's how I feel. I was talking about how, like, you know, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier, but like how people like know who you are, but they don't really know who you are. Like they don't know me, like who I really am, and so that can like sometimes scare people away if they're not like ready to be introspective. Because like I'm cool, it's just like it takes a while to like get to know me, I guess. And sometimes if you're not fitting the box that people set up for you in their mind, then you know, I was always like the different kid, so it always took people a bit longer to get to know me. Yeah.
So like going along those lines of like that statement where people say that they know you but they don't actually know you, do you see poetry as being kind of like that gateway for people understanding who you really are?
Absolutely. I feel like poetry knows me more than myself because that's when I'm most honest. And because of the spoken word scene as well, they don't really have any choice but to sit down and listen, you know, if they're at an open mic, right? Unless they just want to leave. But I think I think people want real conversations. At least, you know, my personality. I don't like small talk that much. I'll engage in it. I'm getting better at it because it's kind of how you survive social settings, right? And I want to make connections, and a part of that is actually doing the small talk. It's going to the water cooler and like, oh, how was your weekend? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just how it is. And as much as I used to dread it, I realize like my poetry, like when I bring it up, people get interested a bit, or they're at least somewhat curious, because you know, poetry is in a good space, but it's you know, it's still poetry. I don't know a lot of people outside of our spaces that really do it like that. So yeah, I think it gives people a chance to get to know me. I think it gives people a chance to look at life different, I guess. Yeah.
And speaking of these poetry spaces, are you involved in any clubs or organizations that are poetry oriented?
Not any clubs or orgs here, but I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm an official member, but there's the Mercy Notes business group that hosts events. They have like events like the Vault, where they have musicians, poets perform unreleased work. I wouldn't say I'm a part of Black Expression, but I've always been a huge fan of like that open mic scene. So yeah, they're family. Honestly, I love them. I just love who they are and what they are to the community. I love what they represent. Like, they're all about just like accepting people and giving the space for people to just kind of break down on stage if they need to, but like in a way that's not damaging or self-sabotage, but in a way that will make other people feel. So yeah, Mercy Notes, Black Expression. What else? I think that's mainly it for creative space. But you know, I'd be at open mics and other places. I'll be around. The San Diego poetry or the San Diego creative scene, I feel I'm a part of that. Like, we're deep, and I love how diverse and vast we are. Like, I feel like, you know, San Diego kind of gets slept on, I guess. At least that's the perception we all have, right? Compared to LA, but San Diego is so rich in culture. Like, we really got a lot of beautiful people that make beautiful things.
Are those San Diego poetry organizations typically the ones you connect with to do live performances of poetry?
Yeah, those are the ones. So sometimes I'll get invited. Sometimes there'll be an open mic and I just go. Sometimes they'll have events set up. It just depends on what they're doing. What I love about it is kind of like the creative scene is kind of like the organizing scene, which is kind of like the people who are athletes. Like, everyone kind of just has their groups. Like, I don't want to say it's unintentional, but it's definitely like, oh, I saw him or her at this place. Oh, I saw them at this place. Like, you just keep seeing the same people over and over again. And I really like it. I love that. Yeah.
And Could you walk me through your experience of performing live poetry, like slam poetry or spoken word poetry?
Yeah, so normally I'm pacing back and forth, trying to remember the poem, making sure I'm good. If I really know the poem, then I'm straight. But I'll, like, maybe the night before or the day of, like in the morning, I'll run through the poem at least once. An hour before the event, I'll do it again. Because most of the spoken word pieces I write are no longer than 3 minutes, mainly because I'm practicing for like competitive stuff if I want to do that. And the way that competitive poets are trained, they're trained to make their poems 2.5 minutes long, just in case for any slip-ups or crowd reactions, because you lose points after the 3-minute mark in the competitive scene, at least from what I've been told. So yeah, I'm thinking of the poem, I'm walking through it in my mind. My heart is kind of beating fast, butterfly type stuff because I care. And then once I get on stage, like everything kind of just, I don't know, everything just drops. I don't even know what I'm saying at that point. I remember, like, I love it, but I hate it at the same time. Like, even now, like, there's points where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm talking right now. I'm not even thinking. It's kind of just free flowing. When I'm up on stage, it's like that too. I'll have like 2 voices, the voice that I'm projecting that everyone hears, but then the voice in my head where I'm like, okay, you got this line coming up, be ready, or you got this right. Like, it's kind of chaotic, but in a good way, I guess. It's very deep. I never realized how crazy it got, but hopefully I can like kind of dial it down and just have one voice while performing. But I think some of the extra preparedness of me kind of gets in the way of that sometimes. So yeah.
Do you remember like what locations or what venues you performed at?
Oh yeah, so the Hamlet Coffee Shop in Lemon Grove, right across the Big Lemon. Queen Bee's, the most legendary spot in the world. That's like a landmark. If anyone tours in San Diego, they need to go to Queen Bee's, because you know Rudy Francisco started out there. All Natasha D, like all these people that really paved the way for poetry and like on a national level for San Diego. They were there at one point. Queen Bee's is legendary. Queen Bee's is always going to be what it is. Like, we're never getting rid of that. Like, that's never going down. It just has to stay. Because there was a point in the pandemic where we had to like fundraise and stuff just to keep it open because a lot of businesses were going under. And so Queen Bee's, it made it through the storm, and that's because of the value that the owner, I believe her name is Alma, the love and care that she put into the community. It all goes back to her. Like, we love her. That's the Queen Bee. Whenever you see her, that's the Queen Bee. So there's the Hamlet Coffee Shop, which I think is also in the process of becoming legendary. Just the whole purpose behind that. It's more than a coffee shop. It's really a community hub. I think it's going to be one of the best locations for just events in general in the near future. So those 2 locations that I mentioned, I've performed. Where else have I performed? I performed at USD, actually. It was for their Black Student Union a few years back. I performed in churches. I performed in, all kinds of places. Outside venues, like parks and stuff. I've kind of been all over the place. But yeah, those first 2 locations are fire. Black Expression used to have open mics at this place called The Church, which was like this art gallery type thing. They're set up in Texas as well, but I think they closed down their San Diego site. And then there was another gallery. And then after that, there was the World Beat Center, which I performed at as well, which is in Balboa Park. And yeah, so I've kind of been a little all over the place. Yeah, been around.
And what types of live poetry have you performed? Has it only been spoken word? Or?
I love this question. So I'm really starting to get into more rhythmic poems or chants / anthems. So it involves crowd participation. So there'll be stuff where I'm snapping and I have them snap with me. I have a poem I'm working on where you have to use your feet and then clap, that everyone does with me. When you're in those settings, kind of like the ones I mentioned, and you're able to get everyone to participate, or at least 90%, the energy of the room shifts. I think everyone kind of just realizes, like, wait a minute, like, we're all making music right now. Like, the sound of just that collective consciousness, it really changes the mood for people. It makes people feel more connected even if they don't know each other. So I'm trying to do more of that. I love that right now. So yeah, between that and spoken word, those are the two styles I have. Yeah.
And building off that feeling of connection, do you believe that connection is like a big idea of poetry?
Yes, because I think poetry, if you live your life in the way of poetry, I think the intent is to connect. I think connection is a part of human survival, and it's essential. Because I honestly, I think, you know, we're in a space now where social interactions, like social anxiety, all that kind of stuff kind of gets in the way of that connection. And it's not necessarily the fault of the person, but we're so much more enhanced once we actually connect with people. Like, we're wonderful on our own, and I think we all bring unique qualities to the table. I think we're all valuable individually. But once we're, like, connected with people on, like, a mutual understanding and mutual respect and mutual love, despite our differences, oh man, that's when revolution starts. That's when poetry is real. That's how movements start. that's the stuff that literally can change a one-day, like, movement to, like, a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year movement. Like, that's the stuff that really changes perspective and ideas, collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And going back to your experience in the live performances, what were your favorite memories from these?
Man. So another place I forgot to mention that I performed at, it was this stage, underground, where the former Horton Plaza Mall used to be. I think it was called La something. It was underground. I don't want to say La Mirada because that sounds wrong. But it was basically, you'll see it if you're in the downtown area of San Diego, and you see like this little circular thing, and there's stairs, and you walk down, and it's like, oh, there's like a whole venue under here. It was the Umoja Fest, or no, Kuumba Fest, and that was one of my favorite performances because it was my first full-length set that I did on my own. I did 3 different poems, and I think that was when I solidified that I can actually memorize a set. Like, I'm capable. And the love that I received back was great. I feel like I affected the room. I believe there was impact. And it was right before the pandemic starting, so that was another thing. Like, I was like, I'm glad I got to do it before we all kind of had to disconnect for a bit. So yeah, that was probably my favorite performance so far.
And then kind of like the other side of that, what do you think were the most challenging things during these live performances?
Getting out of my head, because I have to be there when memorizing, right? But I think, just trusting myself, being gracious to myself. And if I slip up, nobody knows, so it's all good, unless they know the poem, of course. But once I get to that point, oh man, that's a little scary. But yeah, I think getting out of my own head, as well as just, calming myself down. I just gotta calm myself down, because, like, even after, you know how dogs get the zoomies when being really excited? Like, after I do something that I'm really proud of, like, I literally just can't, like, I'm not running back and forth in the room, but I'm just on 10, like, I'm just walking, my confidence is louder, my voice is louder, I'm just a different person. So, I try to make sure that I set myself up to get to that point to where I can be more carefree while performing, but it's hard because I care a lot. So.
And do you think these live performances have been one of those things in your life that just puts you at that 10 all-time high feeling?
Absolutely. There's nothing like it. The only thing I could probably compare it to is playing music in a band with other people. It's just the way, I feel like we're so, like, gifted and blessed to have creative endeavors and and music and sound and rhythm, because that's how you can like stir the spirit. And once you get to a certain point, like you're not even thinking, you're just going. And once you get to that point, it's like there's nothing that can stop you. Not really. Nothing can really slip you up. And so that's kind of like when I talk about like how poetry is like a lifestyle in a way, I kind of want to live like that too. Like just being in a zone constantly, regardless of who tries to take me down, even if it's myself. It's some deep stuff, but yeah.
And what motivated you to start participating in these live?
Oh, I like this. So I remember watching Def Jam poetry slams on YouTube, and I was like, I love this. I think one of the first ones I saw was Kanye's, because he was doing his old stuff from College Dropout, and I think he was doing it as a spoken word piece rather than a rap or a song. Mos Def was the host. Alicia Keys has been on there, all different kinds of people. I think there's one poet named Rashawn or something like that who has a really cool poem. There's just a lot of really great people. Felicia Rashad was on there. She was reading, but it was still great. All kinds of people, right? And I was watching these videos, and I'm like, that's what I want to do with poetry. Because when people hear poetry, some people are like not in the mood because they might think it bores them. But I think spoken word and the ability to write well, like that mixture, it's more so bringing something alive rather than thinking you have to settle for something that's mundane or just not fun. I think it just adds something to spoken word, adds something to the literary world that isn't often done in other forms. So I was inspired by them. And then I kept watching more and more videos, and I was branching out. I was looking at button poetry. I was looking at competitive slams. There was P4CM that was still doing I don't know if they're still doing stuff, but they're great. All kinds, man. People are really amazing.
And building off on that, how has your experience in live poetry impacted your mindset on what poetry is?
How has poetry built my mindset on poetry?
How has your experience in a live poetry performances impacted your mindset on poetry?
So my mindset on poetry. So keeping people engaged is important. So I think I brought up punchlines earlier. Just trying to, challenge myself to write in a way that is going to make people listen without feeling like, oh, I've heard this before. And the different literary devices I can use to achieve that. There is this one guy, he used like different NFL teams to write basically perform a story. And he wasn't using it in football ways, but he was using it in real life ways. And I'm like, that's amazing. Because the people that he can grasp with that are outside of the poetry world can still appreciate it. I think what I'm trying to be mindful of the most is to not worry about the rhymes necessarily, but worry more about cadence, be more intentional about form, be more intentional about messaging, layering poems, being able to have a beginning, middle, and end, like effective storytelling. Because it's cool to just like have certain lines that I have and bring them in later, but if it's not one cohesive thought, it's a lot harder to do. So I think that's what the live performances have done for me. It's made me more conscious and aware of how to properly present something in the poetic world that can be appreciated, but also be appreciated in different worlds outside of poetry.
And similarly, how have your experience in live poetry performances impacted your enthusiasm for writing poetry?
It makes me want to keep going. Like, I feel like whenever I finish a performance, it's like I want to write the next one, because it's like I don't want to keep performing the same poem over and over and over again. So it just encourages me to keep writing. It encourages me to think differently. It encourages me to figure out how to get crowd reaction, or like what I can adjust. I have to do better at I have the opportunity to do better at understanding my voice and like actually recording myself and then listening to myself and being okay with not liking my voice at certain points, but understanding that my voice is still effective. I appreciate my voice, and thinking of ways of how I can influx in certain areas too.
And 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, how do you see poetry being part of your life?
I want to have multiple books out. I want to have competed in more slams, competed on the national slam team. I want to be in a space where when you hear Nick Martin, you know what it's for. And it's not just a guy that makes EDM, but there's another guy from San Diego, California that makes really great poetry. Yeah.
And this is another one of like a bit of an abstract question, but what do you see when you look in the mirror?
The first thing that came to mind was love. I'm really like building on the self-love stuff. Like I've been writing affirmations a lot lately, and I think I'm beginning to like love myself a lot more when I see myself in the mirror, and doing it in a way that's not narcissistic. So yeah.
And do you have any advice or suggestions for individuals who would like to write poetry?
You're already a poet, you just don't know how to put the words together yet. If you're a human being and you have emotions, you're a poet. At least that's how I always tell it to people. Because you have the ability to feel, and that's the point, at least in my opinion. So once you're able to formulate some of that, you'll feel a lot better. You're probably not going to like your stuff at first, but that's okay. I didn't like all my stuff at first. I still am hard on myself sometimes with that. Read and listen and watch other people and how they do it. And honor the past a bit too. There's still literary forms like sestinas, right? That they're very challenging to write, but they force you to think in a way that you wouldn't think of naturally, at least in my opinion. Because you have to do it, you have to repeat words or phrases and adjust them in a pattern for 6 stanzas. So 6 lines, 6 stanzas, and having a stanza for the 7th and using them all within 3 lines. Just the ability to challenge that, and like that's from like centuries ago. You don't have to do that, because freeform is really like what everyone loves, right? Because that's the most natural thing. But I'd say challenge yourself once you get to a certain point that you don't think you can write anything else. Like once you feel like you run out of ideas, find something that you can challenge yourself on. And it doesn't have to be released, it doesn't have to be published, it doesn't have to be shared with anyone, but work on your craft, because that's the kind of stuff I'm doing right now to make my book better. So yeah.
And do you have any advice or suggestions for individuals who love to write poetry but are losing their motivation to do so, or to stay consistent?
I understand like the whole thing of losing motivation. I know it's like you want the encouraging words to like just get back in there, but sometimes it's kind of necessary. I think for me, some of the stuff I went through in life made my poetry better, but I couldn't have written certain poems without the experience. So if you feel like you're being drawn away from poetry, be aware and ask yourself why that is. And then if you're looking at your situation in life, like maybe it's just you're working a lot or something, find the poetry in that. Because if you're a real poet, you're going to find poetry in everything. And so that's what's going to get you right back into it. Yeah, for sure. I think that's my answer for that.
And for the last question, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Above the Waves, The Inner Child. That's the name of my book. I don't have a complete date yet, but that's going to be the name of my first book that I release. And I'm hoping to do it very soon. I don't want to have
a date said and not fulfill it. So I'm gonna just put it out into the atmosphere. But that's what I'm excited for. And then also for poetry and stuff, like, or any creative endeavor, like, be okay with being consistent for a while and not seeing any fruit of your labor. Like, just be okay with planting seeds. Be okay with tilling the land. Be okay with being patient. And be okay with the journey. And be okay with it not going the way you thought it would. Because most of the stuff in life is out of our control. And I can personally say right now, like, the way my life has gone so far is not going the way I planned. However, it's going the way I believe helped me the most. So yeah, that's with anything, but especially the creatives, because we wear our hearts on our sleeves and we're mad impatient and we need validation sometimes. So I know it's hard to get through that.
Yeah, and in case the readers want to know where to see like your portfolio of written works, where can they go to see that?
So I have a couple things. So the Orange Line Poet on Instagram is probably my most active place for my poetry, just because I use that to cite my blog, which is the blog is called Stay Above It, a Nick Martin blog. And so that's on Blogger, but you can just go through my Instagram link and see it.
What?
Yeah, go ahead.
What is your Instagram?
The Orange Line Poet. TheOrangeLinePoet. It's referencing the Orange Line trolley, because that's where I got the name from. There's a whole backstory to that as well, but yeah, I'd say most of my writing is through there right now, and also YouTube. It will be under Nick Martin. You can look up like Nick Martin 60-Second Saturdays or Nick Martin Untitled Puzzle, and you'll see it. Yeah. And
just one more thing, are there any venues which we might catch you doing the live performance?
So there's going to be a few open mics that I'm going to try to hit. Black Expression's opening back up in October, so I don't know how long that's going to be, but it's going to be on Fridays at the Hamlet Coffee Shop. And then Queen Bees, they have their Poetry Slam open mics on on Thursdays. I think every other Thursday. So I'm going to try to hit those up. It's kind of hard, though, because I'd be busy with work at school, but I love what they do, so there's those. And then there's others I got to try to get to. Like, there's Sunset Kava, I think. It's like a little shop. They have open mics. Who else? I mean, everyone kind of has an open mic now. But, yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Yeah.
All right.
See me around.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Of course.
Thank you.
Of course. That was so cool, man.
Yeah.
What the heck?